Hello, Massachusetts, and welcome to a special production about CORI reform here at the Somerville Community Access Television Studios. We have a couple of guests to talk about CORI, Criminal Offender Record Information. It's an issue that's been debated and discussed in the State House for years. Various groups are working to get this issue addressed in Massachusetts. My name is Andrew McLeod, your host this evening, and we are delighted to have a couple of guests to talk about CORI from Massachusetts. We are in support of a particular bill that is sponsored by State Representative Liz Malia and State Senator Harriet Chandler. The bills are being discussed and debated as we speak in the State House. We're supporting Bill number 3523 in the House of Representatives and supporting Senate Bill 1608 in the Senate. Groups like the Boston Workers Alliance, Neighbor to Neighbor, the Massachusetts AFL-CIO, religious organizations. There are a variety of different groups working, supporting this bill. We hope you'll support it, and we'd like to welcome our guests. To my direct right is Horace Small. He is Executive Director of the Union of Minority Neighborhoods. He's a father of three, a resident of Cambridge, and a longtime community organizer. Welcome, Horace. Hey, thanks for coming down.
It's a pleasure.
We're also delighted to have Jack Cole. Jack is Executive Director of LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, a group with over 15,000 members in 76 countries. He is a former detective lieutenant with the New Jersey State Police, where he served for 26 years. He is also a father of five, a resident of Medford, and he is working on his issues around the country and around the world, and we were lucky to have him come on tonight. Jack, thank you for coming down.
You're very welcome, Andrew.
CORI reform. Perhaps both of you would just like to take a minute to just give an opening statement about CORI and your thoughts about CORI and where you think we should be going.
Well, I think obviously that CORI reform, CORI has been an issue since it was created in 1972. And when it was created in 1972, the original premise of CORI was, in fact, to protect people who had criminal records so that they would be allowed to get apartments and get jobs. And the only people who would have access to them would be law enforcement. But since the days of Bill Weld and consequently 16 years of Republicans, what you have now is a law that is probably the most draconian in the country. The need to, in a state of 6.3 million people, 2.8 of them have criminal records in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And the consequence of that is that people can't find jobs, they can't get housing, in some cases can't get health care, can't get financial aid to go to school. The need, obviously, in these tough economic times to give people second chances, which is essentially what this country purportedly was about, and the economic situation the way it is, certainly suggests that it's time for Massachusetts to revisit this issue and to do something affirmatively that will allow people the opportunity to do what they can do to survive.
Okay, thank you, Horace.
Well, Andrew, my organization, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, exists to try to end the drug prohibition in this country. And the reason we're doing that is not so that more people will be using drugs, it's so that we will have a better community all around. We know that in every country that's loosened up these laws and gone toward a more humanitarian way of dealing with this, they have reduced death, disease, crime, and addiction to drugs. So I'm here to talk about the CORI because I think it's a terrible system overall, and certainly these two bills, this bill that's in the House and in the Senate, are good bills, but I wouldn't think they even go far enough. We can discuss what they do, but to me, we should be interested in treating people like they're human beings and like we would like to be treated ourselves. And if you give people incentives for having a good life, that's what happens. But if you take away all their hope for the future, by doing stuff like this CORI, which, you know, you can end up on that CORI for tiny little crimes, and yes, and right now they last for a misdemeanor it's 10 years, and for a felony it's 15 years that you're on the CORI, and during that time you have a hard time getting a job, you have a hard time getting housing, whatever, and that's even if you've cleaned up completely and are living in an absolutely straight and narrow life, you know. Mm-hmm. It's just so punitive.
Well, let's just back up for a minute, because Massachusetts is one of the few states, from what I understand, that has this criminal offender record system. And it was, like you said, Horace, it was created in 1972 for two reasons, from what I understand. One, to computerize the records within the justice system. And two, to protect the privacy of anyone with a record. And yet, here we are in 2009, in which the reverse has occurred. Instead of protecting the privacy of those who have a record, the problem is that privacy has been demolished, and now the record stays on for a long time. People have access to it who aren't in the law enforcement community. It just seems like it's strange how it started out as protecting the privacy and is reversed.
I mean, you have to be clear. I mean, how all of this transpired in Massachusetts was you know, during the campaign between Dukakis and Bush 1, there was an individual named Willie Horton. And if you know anything, which convinced a whole lot of people in Lexington and Concord, in Sudbury, that this big ugly black man was going to be coming to your neighborhood real soon, and convinced folks in Charlotte, West Virginia, and lots of other places that this is what he'll do for what he did for Massachusetts, he'll do for you. And one of the things, I mean, Jack and I have worked with the Massachusetts legislature for a long time, and the one thing I'm not willing to do is give them some kudos, because these are folks that govern by whatever is in the Boston Herald on any particular day. And the consequence of that is that, you know, when Willie Horton came about, they came up with a whole slew of laws, okay, that made Massachusetts more, you know, that made the laws more stringent, that tightened the noose around people's necks, that has created the situation that we're today. Now, one of the things we haven't talked about is the fact that because of the work that a lot of folks have done, Mayor Menino, Chuck Turner, us, UMN, I mean, you know, Aaron Tanaka and Boston Workers Alliance, you know, getting landmark legislation through local city councils that would end the discrimination of folks, that is now why we're at this place at this time where the legislature and others are now saying, well, maybe we have to begin to start looking at it. I mean, the truth of the matter was, when the movement first started with oh, I can't think of the gentleman's name now, but an organization that mostly of black men who had criminal records, who would routinely go to the legislature and say, look, we need relief, we need relief, we need relief, and it was like, yeah, right. Okay. Then, when it became clear in 2004, when the work really started to happen, people became clear that 2.8 million people with criminal records in this state. And if you do the math, then, you know, if blacks only make up 8% of the population, Latinos a little less than 10%, right, Jack? Yeah. And Asians less than 3%, then 2.8 million. There's a whole lot of white guys with criminal records.
Absolutely.
So the organizing strategy was, let's go find them. The consequence was organizations like Epica. The consequence was, you know, ex-prisoners organized for community action, doing what they had to do in Western Massachusetts and in Central Massachusetts. That's why you had organizations in Lowell. That's why you had mass organization for addiction and recovery. People started to come out, and the minute that legislators started to see folks that look like Jack, folks that look like you, folks that look like the sister who on camera, you know, when they began seeing that, it's like, well, maybe this is a fundamental issue and a problem. And even with that knowledge in 2005, even though it passed the Senate 40-0, the original Bill of Public Safety Act, we are still at this moment, at this time, still trying to debate whether or not two bills, the governor's bill and the community's bill, can actually have some level of reality. And Jack is absolutely right. You know, we have to give people their freedom. So there's a whole lot that people don't know about this issue that hopefully we can inspire
Well,
them
and that's why you're here, and it's great to have.
I'm sorry, stop me, Jack.
It's great to have this knowledge to give us, you know, to give us this insight. So basically, you're right on. I mean, it started in '72, 1988 with Willie Horton. They expanded CORI. Then in '92, after the child abuse in the foster homes, I'm trying to remember the name of that particular foster home. Then CORI was expanded again, and now we're at a point where it seems like the amount of requests for CORI, from what I've seen, have dramatically risen 2- or 3-fold in the last 5 or 10 years.
I mean,
there used to be a time when people were punished for what they did on an individual level. But something seemed to happen, and I think it really started changing with the war on drugs. Because when the war on drugs came around, we got this thing called zero tolerance attitude, right? Now that was all cooked up during the fight against drugs. But as soon as that statement got out there, it suddenly ended up in everything. We had zero tolerance attitude for violence, zero tolerance attitude for gender discrimination, zero tolerance attitude for weapons in school. And when you're talking about zero tolerance, it's different than just saying, we don't like this and we're going to do something about it. Because of zero tolerance, you get all these weird things, like for gender discrimination, you get a little kid in the 4th grade thrown out of school because he kissed a girl on the cheek, and that's zero tolerance attitude for this. You got for zero tolerance for having weapons in school. A little kid came in, he had peanut butter sandwiches in school. And the peanut butter he didn't like because it would make the bread soft, you know, if it sat there all morning. So his mother put the peanut butter in a little cup and gave him 2 slices of bread and gave him a little plastic knife about this long to spread it. He got suspended, thrown out of school for bringing a weapon to school, a little plastic knife to spread the peanut. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you see, at least I see, everywhere now. And I see things like if something goes wrong and you have young people commit some crimes in a neighborhood, instead of punishing the young people, we put a curfew on the neighborhood. You know, it's all about tighten up everything and restrict everybody from doing anything, and that's what the CORI rules and regulations are about.
Your example of a youngster who may have made a mistake, perhaps something as silly as taking a candy bar out of a store. If that young person happens to be a minority, there's probably a higher likelihood that they will be arrested and convicted. And if they're convicted, that will be on their record for a misdemeanor currently for 10 years. And if it's a felony, 15 years. But what folks don't understand is that actually it's much longer than 10 years because there's a probationary period, a waiting period after that 10-year period. So basically, if you're a young kid, you make a mistake when you're 20, you could be 33, 35 before that's expunged from the records. Is that correct? Seems like an awful long time.
Well, it's not expunged. You're eligible to go to the court to ask the court system to expunge your record. It isn't automatic at 10, 15. I mean, those are numbers that, you know, as you said, Pat. I mean, this is when what happens is that when a person's done with all their court time, this is usually about, on average, about 3.5 years after probation, after parole, they have a thing called the CORI clock, which starts to tick. And if they can, you know, if they can stay out of trouble, if they can stay out of trouble and with a misdemeanor in Massachusetts for 10 years, then it's not automatic. They have to go to court and ask the court to seal their record, and which is on average about $7,000 to $15,000 if you're hiring an attorney. Okay, we at our organization, in Minority Neighborhoods, we actually provide that service for free, working with Greater Boston Legal Services. But that is how it works. Now, if you should like screw up and get caught like a speeding ticket or something, any fine of some sort that's over $75, your CORI clock starts all over again.
So
That's what
one
people
little
don't know.
mistake,
One little mistake,
and you're back into the system.
right? Which is why my friend here deserves as much credit as he should be getting on the issue of question 2, which I know this is not what the topic's about, but it is relevant because it's very relevant because with question 2, his leadership, Leap's leadership on question 2 is what made it possible for the decriminalization of marijuana to happen in this state. A regular occurrence in the city of Boston, in my community, in Jamaica Plain, is that at the Green Street T stop, 2 blocks from Boston English High School, there is usually going to be after school a fight. Okay, usually going to be a fight somewhere down in the Green Street T-stop. And what happens is that the police come and they swarm the T-stop. And you have many kids that will go in another direction who won't have nothing to do with it. But the police will circle them all up. And you always end up with 1 or 2 kids. One kid will have a joint in his pocket who's going to work in Chinatown to wash dishes and got a joint in his pocket to smoke after he's done working. He gets picked up. Had nothing to do with fight, but he gets picked up, and usually his stuff gets thrown out, but he appeared in front of a judge, and so now he has a CORI.
He has a CORI.
Okay? And thanks to the work of Leap and others, they don't have that problem. No one
But
has
that's
that
just
problem.
one small part of the bigger issue. And the Commonwealth CORI Coalition, Boston Workers Alliance, EPICA out in Worcester, they're supporting the House Bill 3523, sponsored by Liz Malia, and the Senate Bill 1608, sponsored by Harriet Chandler. And that would basically say, look, if you have a misdemeanor, after 3 years, it's cleared. After 7 years for a felony, it's cleared. Now, I want to ask you, from what I understand, the recidivism rate tends to be much lower after 3 years. So if you're out of trouble for 3 years, generally that means you're going to stay out of trouble. And I'm asking, is that part of the reason that 3-year was suggested for a misdemeanor and 7 years for a felony?
Well, the reason why it was written into the bill is because all of the social science that's been done, every academic study, every psychological study on earth known to man, says that if a person can stay out of the reach of the criminal justice system for at least 3 years, the chances of them recidivating are like the chances of Mitt Romney opening a crack house, right? I mean, it's not going to happen. And that is why, Harriet Chandler and Liz and before that Diane Wilkerson, in legislation, it was the Public Safety Act of 2007 and 8, was that, the science says it makes sense.
Okay, so we got a 3 years for misdemeanor, 7 years for a felony. But then the other parts of this bill, for example, inaccuracies. I mean, it appears that if your case is dismissed, but someone types in convicted, it's hard to get that change. There's a question of how accurate that information is. The information is confusing for employers. And then we can talk about the whole privatization of records. Apparently, in 2004 in Massachusetts, there were 1.5 million requests for CORI records. This is a 3-fold increase from 10 years ago. There are 2.8 million CORIs kept in Massachusetts. What we have is private companies who are basically getting paid to provide information to other companies or landlords or employers. I mean, it seems like the list is broadening. Where's the accountability? Where's the fact-checking? People are out to make a buck. It doesn't seem that the accuracy and the access, anyone can have access, or it seems like the access is broadening. It used to be law enforcement, then it was social service agencies. Now it's, you want to get housing, you want to get a job working as a dishwasher in a hotel. It seems like everyone's got access to the records aren't clear, they could be inaccurate. These are the things I'm hearing. And these are the things the bill is addressing, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on all these points.
First off, I think everybody should be interested in supporting this bill, because they're talking about cutting back the time that people will be on it by, as you said, 3 years for a misdemeanor and 7 years for a felony. And they're talking about automatic removal of not guilty and dismissed cases from the CORI list, which doesn't happen now. But that is only going a tiny bit of the direction. That's just like when we got the referendum, and 65% of the people in this country, or in this state, in Massachusetts, voted to make decriminalization of 1 ounce of marijuana just a civil fine to avoid this stuff. That's only good for the 7,500 people each year that will be caught with less than an ounce of marijuana. But there's a whole lot more people out there that are affected by this CORI, and to me, this CORI shouldn't even exist, because when you commit a crime, we have sanctions for that crime. You know, you go to court and you get sentenced, and whatever that sentence is, when you're through with that sentence, I think you've paid your price.
Exactly.
And then you should be brought back into the community. You shouldn't be, once that sentence is complete, and once your probation is complete, or parole, then all of a sudden you go on this CORI for years?
Well, Jack,
that's just additional punishment.
Okay, you're from the law enforcement community, but the other side of it is, look, you don't want somebody with a sex offender record near your kids, or somebody who could be violent. I mean,
But that's an important point. I mean, because one of the things that the public gets confused about is that people when we talk about CORI, when you begin to have the conversation about criminal justice, about giving people second chances, the response usually tends to be, particularly those who are uninformed, is like the kind of response that they have with people going to congressional meetings to talk about health care, right? I mean, there's no question, there's no doubt that the American people are some of the dumbest people on earth. I mean, and that's one of the things you have to keep in mind. And that being said, knowing that I've upset a whole lot of your listeners, sorry about that, guys, but the reality is that those folks everybody who has a CORI doesn't have a SORI. All right, that's the sexual offender record. It's a whole separate thing. People on lifetime supervision, on lifetime parole, constantly being observed by law enforcement. But everybody's a SORI has a CORI, but everybody has a CORI doesn't have a SORI.
Okay, so you're saying sex offenders are in a different
They're
category.
a completely different category.
Okay.
And so when we talk about this issue, particularly when you're talking to legislators about this is the thing that will come up, particularly when you're talking about folks in working class communities. I don't want a sex offender talking about. You're not getting a sex offender. You're getting somebody who was dumb enough to get caught with a joint in his pocket. Okay, you're getting someone who was dumb enough to be driving without a license. These are the people who've been penalized behind CORI. You talked about how do you have all these mistakes? Well, up until the last 5 years, when people started putting pressure upon the Criminal History Systems Board, they had basically a free ride. Folks tend to forget, that the mistakes came from, it was a name-based system. It wasn't a fingerprint system. It wasn't a social security number system. It was a name-based system. So if you were Michael Brown, and there must be the 2.8 million names in the system, and if there must be several 100,000 Michael Browns, let's hope that whoever the folks who work at the Criminal History System Board in Chelsea picks up the file, let's hope it's the right one. Because if it's the wrong one, that is what you're going to be permanently known for until you can find a lawyer, which most people with CORIs who are unemployed or aren't making that kind of money. Because the other thing we don't talk about is CORI is a class-based issue. Okay, folks, I mean, Tom Riley, who was the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, had a CORI. He liked to go down to the Cape and pee on walls when he was a teenager. That's what he did. But he had friends. As he moved forward in his career, he had friends, and which helped him move along. But the working class kid, okay, the kid that doesn't have, the guy whose parents go to work every day, or whose parents work 3 jobs, who don't have that, they're the ones who've been penalized by this. That's why when you talk about CORI in Charlestown, when you talk about CORI in Southie, when you talk about CORI in Somerville, it resonates with people because they all know folks. You talk to labor people, they know about CORI. Hell, there's some unions I don't think you can get into without a CORI.
You can call it a modern-day Scarlet Letter, really.
Yeah, you know.
You're exactly right. And let me say something more about punishment, because we are a very punitive country here. Let's go to what my thing is.
We only have a few more minutes. Go ahead.
Working with drug policy. We are such a punitive country, but even aside from drug policy, you know, all the European countries imprison their population at or below 150 people per 100,000. In this country, we imprison our population at 1,009 per 100,000 population. Far more than any country in the world. And look at who our competitors are. Our closest competitor is Russia. We imprison 1.6 times as many people as they do per capita. China is the second one, and we imprison 6 times as many people as China. So either we have the most despicable people in the world
on earth,
or there's something very wrong with what we're doing, you know, and we need to get away from this idea of punish, 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 and start thinking about how do we bring these people back into society, because that is always the simplest way to do it. It's always the cheapest way to do it. We won't be expending all our taxes on this stuff if we do it.
Yep.
But if you give people hope for the future, instead of removing all the hope by these draconian laws like this CORI thing, there will be so many fewer people committing crimes.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, just one last point. If you are found not guilty, let's say you're accused of murder or rape. If you're found not guilty or the case is dismissed, you still have a record.
Yeah.
These are the type of things that need to be addressed in CORI reform, and I think we had some success in covering the issues tonight. We've been speaking with Jack Cole, Executive Director of LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and Horace Small, Executive Director of the Union of Minority Neighborhoods. This is a special production brought to you by Scat TV in Somerville, and I'm Andrew McLeod, your host. We hope you'll support the bills being debated in the State House this coming fall. Bill number 3523, sponsored by Liz Malia, and Bill 1608 in the Senate, sponsored by Senator Harriet Chandler, supporting a 3- and 7-year period for misdemeanor and felony crimes and other issues, inaccuracy, confusing information. I'm concerned about the whole privatization of records. I mean, that should be something that the law enforcement community is responsible for, not, you know, Acme Corporation.
You're right.
And it seems like the prison industrial complex, this is a way to make another buck.
Just remind people that there's, besides Harriet Chandler's bill and Liz Malia's bill, there's also the governor's bill.
Right, but so this show is promoting the 3 and 7, right?
That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
On this show, you really make sure that you know those House bill numbers, because that's the ones that people need in order to get.
And, well, I want to thank you both. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Okay.
Perhaps we can do an expanded show.
Amen.
And thank you very much. Thanks again for watching. Have a good evening and a great week. Good night.